My name is Phil Long, and I went to Kenya. I knew that God wanted to send me to Kenya. And one of the first times that I realized that God wanted to send me to Kenya is when I was 8 years old. I was reading a book about a missionary that went to China. And as I was reading that book, I felt like God talked to me. I mean, like I'm talking to you right now, and said to me, Phil, one day you're going to be a missionary. One day you're going to go to places that are outside of the United States. And that became alive to me 2 years later. When I was 10 years old, my parents came to my sisters, my two sisters and I, and said, we're going to move to Africa. And so we moved, our family moved to Africa, and we lived in the jungles in Africa for a year. We lived with no electricity. I saw so many things there, and that's when I started realizing that God was sending me for the rest of my life to go. Well, Kenya is in Africa, and in Africa they have lots of animals like you see on TV. They have zebras and giraffes, and the people there are very nice. Most people don't have cars, so families have to walk everywhere. Some of them have bicycles, and so they ride their bikes, but most people walk everywhere they go. I was a missionary in Kenya. I went to Kenya to work with young people, with children, because there's a lot of street kids in the city I was in. There are thousands of children that leave their homes and their villages, and they come into the city and they just live by themselves. And so one of the things that I went to do is to help those street kids. There are churches in Kenya, and church there in some places are a lot like church here. When sometimes you go out in the villages, sometimes they have church without a building, and so you'll see a group of children under a tree listening to Bible stories and listening to their teachers teach Bible stories, but they don't have a building. One of the big differences, though, is they have a lot of different religions. They have Muslims who don't believe in Jesus. They don't believe that Jesus is the Son of God. They have a lot of rules that they live by, but they don't know Jesus in their heart, and they don't know that they can have Him in their heart either. Sometimes the people, they worship idols. They worship little carvings, and they worship the trees, and they worship animals and different things like that because they don't know any difference. That's how they've done it for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they don't know that there's a good God to serve. They serve the idols out of fear a lot of times because they don't know that God is good. They don't know that Jesus can come and He can touch your life, and He can change your life, and He can live inside you. Something very incredible happened when I was in Kenya. One day I was in my office at the church, and I walked out to the street, and there was a man coming by, and he had dirty clothes on, and he looked like he was really afraid. And so I walked out on the street and I asked him, can I help you? And he just looked at me like he didn't understand. And the reason why he looked like that is because he didn't understand, because he couldn't hear. He was deaf and he couldn't talk. And he just patted his stomach and told me that he was hungry. And so I went back inside, and the only thing I had was a jar of peanut butter and a pack of crackers. And so I got those, and I walked back out to the street, and I gave it to him. And when I did, he looked like he was very afraid and thought I was going to do something to him. And I tried to tell him that, no, I'm not going to hurt you. And I gave him the crackers and the peanut butter. And I started to turn around, and I felt like, what would Jesus do in this situation? Jesus, I'm sure, would have given him food if he had food. But then I thought, you know, Jesus did all kinds of miracles in the Bible, and Jesus would have probably prayed for this man to be healed as well. And so I turned around and I asked the guy, I put my hands together and I said, can I pray for you? And so finally he understood what I was trying to say, and he nodded to me. Even though he was still very afraid, he nodded to me and said, yes, you know, I could pray for him. And so I laid hands on him, and I started praying for him, and I said, Jesus, this man can't even hear me, He doesn't even know what prayers I'm praying. So it's not my prayers, but it's your power that can heal this man. Then I thought about the stories in the Bible that sometimes Jesus, he made mud pies and he stuck them on a blind man's eyes, and the blind man opened his eyes and he was healed. And so I thought, you know, I'm gonna try something like that. And I stuck my fingers in the deaf man's ears, and I started praying for him and said, God, please heal this man. Please open his ears and touch his mouth and his tongue so he can talk. And when I said that, immediately the man's eyes got really big. And I looked at him because my eyes got really big because I realized that something happened. And the man started trying to mimic the prayers that I was praying, and sound started coming out of his mouth. And then I started talking, and I realized that the man could hear, and that God had touched him and healed that deaf man so that he could hear again. And I thought about that, and I thought about how Jesus had done so many miracles in the Bible, and that God sent me to Kenya to do the same thing, and that God sent me there to lay hands on the sick and to see the sick healed. And it was just so exciting because when that happened, the man, he got so much joy in him that he turned around and he began to run down the street, and he was jumping about 3 feet off of the road, and just for the first time, imagine, he could hear the birds sing and the cars go by and people talking. And I thought how good God is, and that God would send me to Kenya to help this one man. When I went to Kenya, when I was 24 years old, is when I went to Kenya. I realized, God, you did tell me that this was going to happen. You did speak to me when I was 8 years old, and you did send me to Kenya.